The printer jammed on the 12th floor at 11:47 p.m., which was fine. The printer on the 23rd floor was out of toner, which was less fine. The printer in the basement copy room had apparently been unplugged and pushed into a corner like a shamed relative, which meant Maya Evans was now stepping out of a service elevator on the 50th floor of Zenith Tower at 4 minutes past midnight with a USB drive, a prayer, and approximately zero business being here. The executive floor smelled different. She noticed that immediately. Not like the rest of the building, which carried the institutional perfume of recycled air and ambition. Up here it was something older, cooler, like stone after rain. The corridor stretched ahead of her in expensive darkness, lit only by recessed panels flush against the floor, casting everything in a blue-white glow that made the whole space look like the inside of a very upscale aquarium. Maya reminded herself she was a professional intern, technically, 3 weeks from the end of her placement, one presentation away from the scholarship that would wipe out 4 years of debt and actually mean something. She was not trespassing. She was innovating her workflow. There was a distinction. The printer was supposed to be in the northeast alcove. She had this on good authority from Dalia in administrative services, who had mentioned it exactly once, 6 weeks ago, in a context that did not include unauthorized midnight access to a restricted floor. Maya chose to interpret this as tacit permission. She found the alcove. She found the printer, a machine so sophisticated it looked like it could file its own taxes. She plugged in her USB drive and started the job and stood there listening to the warm mechanical whisper of something actually working, which was nearly enough to make her cry with relief. 12 pages in, she heard water. Not dripping, not the ambient white noise of a building at rest. Movement. The deep, deliberate displacement of something large shifting through a substantial volume of liquid. It came from behind the door to her left, which was slightly ajar, which was how she could hear it, which was how she made the single worst navigational decision of her internship. She told herself later that she thought it might be a leak. A burst pipe. A facilities emergency that a quick-thinking junior employee might heroically flag. She told herself this and did not entirely believe it, but it was the version she committed to. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was enormous, and it was cold enough that her breath formed a small cloud in front of her face the moment she crossed the threshold. It took her eyes a full second to process what she was seeing, because her brain kept rejecting the initial data. The far wall was glass, floor to ceiling, looking out over the glittering sprawl of the city below. In front of it, occupying a space that should have held a conference table or a sitting area or literally anything normal, was a tank. There was no better word for it. A custom-built structure of reinforced glass and dark steel framework, roughly 8 feet long and 4 feet wide and deep enough that the man currently submerged in it was covered to the shoulder. The water was not merely cold. Even from 10 feet away, Maya could see the crushed ice packed around him, dense and glittering, the surface of the water perfectly still except for the slow expansion of ripples that had followed whatever movement she had heard. The man had his eyes closed. He was enormous. Even submerged, even motionless. The fact of his size was immediately apparent. Broad shoulders cresting the ice line, neck thick and perfectly still, face carved like something assembled by someone who had decided to simply ignore the concept of moderation. Dark hair. Jaw that could have been used to teach geometry. She clocked all of this in the half-second before his eyes opened. They were gold. Not brown, not hazel, not some trick of the blue-white lighting, though she checked that theory instantly and discarded it. Gold, bright and deep and absolutely, categorically, not a human eye color, catching the light like a predator's eyes catch a flashlight beam in the dark. They snapped to her with a precision that suggested he had known exactly where she was standing before he opened them. Maya stopped breathing. Kaelen Vance, CEO of Apex Vanguard Group, the most feared executive in the conglomerate sector, did not move for 3 full seconds. He looked at her from inside his tank of ice water The way a very large, very patient animal looks at something that has just made a noise in its territory. Assessing. Categorizing. Deciding. Then he stood up. The water cascaded off him in sheets. He was wearing dark fitted shorts, nothing else. And the sheer physical fact of him unfolding to full height was something Maya's nervous system registered as an event, not merely a visual. 6.5 feet of muscle and intent, ice water streaming down the ridges of his chest and arms, steam rising faintly from his skin in the cold air of the room, which meant his body temperature was significantly higher than any normal human baseline, and that was a detail she absolutely did not have the processing capacity for right now. He stepped over the edge of the tank without looking down. His feet hit the floor. He reached for the folded towel on the steel ledge beside it, unhurried, and pressed it briefly against his face, then held it at his side like it was an afterthought. His eyes had not left her. "You are not authorized to be on this floor." His voice was low and even, and hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Not loud, just heavy. "I'm aware," Maya said, and was privately impressed that actual words came out of her mouth, because her entire body wanted to do something unhelpful, like back into the wall or dissolve. "I'm very, extremely aware. I'm also leaving. Right now. Immediately." She took one step backward. "Stop." She stopped. He crossed the distance between the tank and the center of the room in a few unhurried strides, and she had the very specific, very uncomfortable sensation of watching something large move through a space that it owned on a cellular level. Water still ran in rivulets down his forearms. The cold air around him shimmered faintly, a heat distortion that made no atmospheric sense. "You're the Evans intern," he said. It was not a question. The fact that he knew her name was either deeply flattering or deeply alarming, and she was currently in no state to determine which. "Maya Evans, yes, sir. Senior Analytics Intern, Consumer Strategy Division. I was just using the printer because the other printers are all... You walked into my private suite. I walked into what I believed might be a facilities emergency." She heard how that sounded. "I know how that sounds." He was closer now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, which was a new experience, because Maya was not short. The warmth radiating off him was at direct odds with the room temperature and the ice water still gleaming on his skin, and the combination was doing something genuinely disorienting to her ability to construct a rational exit strategy. "Your presentation," he said, glancing briefly toward the door, toward the sound of the printer still running in the alcove. "The Meridian account restructuring. You authored the secondary analysis." Yes." She blinked. "How do you know about the secondary analysis?" "That's internal to my division. It hasn't been submitted yet. It's literally printing right now for the first time. I read everything that moves through this building." His gold eyes came back to her. "It was the only competent document produced by your entire floor this quarter." Under any other circumstances, that would have been the best professional moment of her life. Standing dripping wet in an ice room at midnight, being called competent by a billionaire with supernatural eyes while technically committing corporate trespass was a context that complicated the compliment somewhat. "Thank you," she said carefully. "I'll just collect my pages and sign whatever NDA you need me to sign, and we can both pretend this never happened." "You saw my eyes." The words landed flat and final. Not a question, not an accusation. A closed door. Maya kept her face very still, which was something she was good at when necessary. "I saw a very tired executive making use of a medically interesting cold therapy technique, which I fully respect and have zero opinions about." Something moved across his expression. Not softness, not even close to softness, but a fractional recalibration, like a very precise instrument acknowledging unexpected data. "You're not afraid," he said. "I am absolutely terrified," she said clearly. I'm just also very good at not showing it, which is a skill I developed in 3 consecutive rounds of undergraduate finals, and have apparently been training for this specific moment. He moved then, and it was slow and deliberate and gave her every opportunity to step aside, which she did not have room to do, because she had not noticed the glass wall at her back until she felt it against her shoulder blades. He stopped with roughly 18 inches between them, which was close enough that she could see the exact shade of gold in his eyes, could feel the impossible warmth coming off his skin, could count the heartbeats her own pulse was skipping. "You have 2 options," he said. "I'm familiar with being given options," she said. Her voice was admirably steady. She was very proud of her voice. "You go back to the Consumer Strategy Division. Your presentation fails without the secondary analysis. You lose the scholarship." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse. Just facts, clearly arranged. "Or you accept a reassignment, effective immediately." Maya stared at him. "You can't promote someone at midnight." "I own the company." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What reassignment?" "Executive assistant. Direct report to me." His eyes did not flicker. "You manage my schedule, my correspondence, my interface with the executive floor. You attend every meeting I attend. You have full access to the 50th floor. The word interface snagged in her brain. She looked at the tank. She looked at the room. She looked at the towel still hanging from his hand like he had already moved on from the concept of being soaking wet at midnight and was ready to discuss Q3 projections. "You need someone who knows the secret," she said slowly. "And you'd rather promote a nobody intern than fire her and risk an NDA being suspicious. I need someone effective who is not yet invested in any political faction within this building." He tilted his head by approximately 3 degrees, which on him read as significant movement. "Your analysis demonstrated you understand systems. This is a system. Keep it running. Keep it quiet." Maya looked at him for a long moment. The printer hummed distantly in the alcove. 12 floors of failed machinery had led her here, to this room, to this exact absurd precipice. "My scholarship," she said. "Guaranteed. In writing, by morning. I want an office with a window." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the negative space where a smile might theoretically exist in a different man, in a different life. "You'll have the one adjacent to mine." "I have conditions," she said. "You have 1 condition remaining," he said. "You used the window." She exhaled. She looked once more at the tank, at the ice still floating in the water, at the city glittering 49 floors below them, at this enormous, impossible, golden-eyed problem standing between her and the door. "Fine," Maya Evans said, "but I'm collecting my printouts first." The office adjacent to his had a window that faced east, which meant Maya watched the sun come up over the city sprawl at 5:30 in the morning while signing 3 documents she had read 4 times each to confirm they were not, in any legally creative way, selling her soul. The scholarship confirmation was real. The reassignment was real. The non-disclosure agreement was 14 pages of dense corporate language that essentially said, whatever you think you saw, you didn't see it. And also, you didn't see it. She signed everything. She collected her printouts. She went home, slept for 3 hours, and returned to Zenith Tower at 8:15 a.m. as the executive assistant to the CEO, which was either the best or most catastrophic development of her professional life, and the morning would determine which. The first task Kaelen Vance handed her at 8:47 was a draft company-wide email. He set a single printed page on her desk, turned without explanation, and walked back toward his office. Maya picked it up. She read it once. She read it again more slowly. She set it down. She picked it up and read it a 3rd time because she wanted to be absolutely certain she was not misreading the tone. She was not misreading the tone. Effective immediately, she read aloud to herself, quietly. All departments will submit performance data on the prescribed schedule. Failure to comply will be noted, and those responsible will be addressed directly. There are no exceptions. There is no appeal process. Comply. She walked to his doorway. Kaelen was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window behind his desk, jacket on, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city the way a person looks at something they are considering acquiring. "This email," Maya said. "Send it." "I can't send this." He turned. He had the particular quality of stillness that large predatory animals have, the kind where the absence of movement is itself a form of attention. It communicates the requirement clearly. It communicates the requirement the way a medieval siege communicates a boundary dispute. She crossed to his desk and set the page down in front of him, smoothing it flat. "You've written a declaration of war to the quarterly reporting team. The quarterly reporting team has missed 3 consecutive deadlines. So we write something like—" She pulled a pen from the cup on his desk and leaned over the page. "We're so excited to align on our data submission timeline and support everyone's workflow going forward." She wrote as she talked. He moved to stand beside her. She was aware of this, the way you are aware of weather systems moving into your area. His presence displaced the air of the room in some measurable physical way, and when he leaned forward to look at what she was writing, one hand braced on the desk beside her, the proximity became an immediate logistical problem for her concentration. "That says nothing," he said. His voice was close. "It says the same thing yours says. It just doesn't make anyone feel like they're about to be publicly executed." She kept her eyes on the paper. Corporate communication is not about information transfer. It's about maintaining the illusion of a collective enterprise in which everyone's contribution is valued. That is a significant amount of effort to accomplish something dishonest. "Welcome to email," Maya said. "We have a newsletter." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him reading over her shoulder, which should have been annoying and was instead doing something thoroughly inconvenient to her pulse rate. She wrote a second line, capping the tone shift with something about collaborative deadlines and team success. "The word excited," he said. "Remove it. It softens it reads as unstable." He straightened, which returned approximately 6 inches of breathing room to the situation. "The rest is acceptable." She looked up at him. "You're saying my version is acceptable. I'm saying it will produce compliance without generating unnecessary conflict." A pause. "Which is what you said it would do." "I just want to acknowledge," Maya said, "that you just agreed with me." "Don't. I won't. I'm just noting it internally." She capped the pen. "For personal records." He walked back to the window. She sent the email. That was Monday. By Wednesday, she had rewritten 2 additional communications. A department directive that had opened with the line, "Underperformance will not be inherited by this organization," and a meeting invitation that had simply read, "Attendance is mandatory. Come prepared to account for your quarter." She was developing what she privately thought of as a translation practice. His natural register ran somewhere between ancient warlord and apex predator. Her job was to render it into something the finance floor would not report to HR. The marketing floor visit happened on Thursday, and it was her idea, which she would later reconsider. The rationale was sound. Kaelen Vance was feared but not understood, and fear without comprehension created exactly the kind of political vacuum that produced expensive problems. If he walked the floor occasionally, if people saw him as a present rather than theoretical force, it would smooth the operational friction that her first week had already shown her was significant. What she had not fully modeled was the effect of his physical presence on a floor of 43 people who had never seen him outside of an all-hands screen presentation. The marketing floor went silent when they stepped out of the elevator. Not quiet, silent. The particular silence of a prey population that has collectively registered a new variable in the environment. Keyboards stopped. Someone's coffee mug paused halfway to their mouth. Kaelen didn't acknowledge any of it. He walked beside her at his natural pace, which required her to take approximately 1.5 steps for every one of his, and she had already stopped mentioning this because the first time he had looked at her with an expression that suggested he was processing why this was her problem. She handled the introductions. She managed the small talk. She watched him absorb information about people with the focused, systematic attention of something that was not conducting small talk so much as building a complete behavioral database of every individual in the room. It was impressive and faintly unsettling, and she admitted to herself, getting used to it. She was 3 feet away, explaining to the marketing director that the new reporting format would reduce cross-team conflicts, when Kaelen went still. Not his regular still. A different quality of stillness entirely. A sharpened, directional focus that she had not seen before. His head turned slightly, barely perceptibly, toward the cluster of junior staff desks in the far corner. His eyes did not change color in the fluorescent light of the marketing floor, but something behind them shifted. Maya noticed. She filed it. She kept talking to the marketing director. Across the floor, at the junior desks, a man named Derek Cho was saying something to a colleague in a voice calibrated to carry no further than 2 feet. He was a senior intern like Maya, technically. Though he had been careful to ensure that everyone understood, he thought of the word intern as a transitional label. He was saying, with quiet satisfaction, that the Meridian restructuring analysis was really more of a team effort when you thought about it, and that he had contributed substantially to the foundational framework, and that he thought the upcoming departmental presentation was really an opportunity to contextualize the full scope of that contribution. He was wrong about the carrying distance of his voice by approximately 47 feet, but he had no way of knowing that. Kaelen said nothing. His head returned to its forward position. He looked at Maya with an expression she was learning to read, neutral on the surface, with a very specific quality of attention underneath it that meant he had processed something and decided what to do about it. She did not know what he had processed. He did not tell her. The departmental meeting was the following morning. Conference room, full floor attendance, the Meridian account restructuring on the agenda, Maya's analysis as the primary document. She had printed fresh copies. She was prepared. She had also, in a small, private act of professional optimism, worn the sharp blue blazer she saved for occasions that mattered. Derek Cho presented first. This was not the agenda order. This was Derek Cho arriving 12 minutes early and rearranging the printed agenda, which Maya discovered when she walked in and found her name listed second. She registered this, looked at the revised order, looked at Derek, and made the decision to let it unfold before she responded. What she had not anticipated was that Derek Cho's presentation would contain her data. Not similar data. Not parallel analysis. Her specific segmentation model. Her customer elasticity calculations. Her 3-tier restructuring recommendation. Presented in his voice, with his name on the slides. The room had 22 people in it. Kaelen was seated at the head of the table. He had been still since he sat down, in the specific way that she now understood meant he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. Derek was 3 slides in when Kaelen spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He set down the pen he had been holding and asked, with complete conversational neutrality, where the segmentation model had originated. Derek said he had developed it through the course of his research. Kaelen asked him to explain the elasticity coefficient in the 3rd tier. Derek began an explanation. He was 2 sentences in when the explanation stopped making sense, because he had not built the model and did not understand the mechanism underneath it, and the gap between his words and the actual mathematics became audible to everyone in the room roughly simultaneously. Kaelen let the silence sit for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said that the segmentation model had been authored by Maya Evans, that he had read it earlier this week when it crossed his document review, that the coefficient Derek had just misdescribed was a deliberate structural choice that only the author would defend correctly, and that he was interested in whether Derek wanted to revise his framing or continue with the current version. Derek's career did not end loudly. It ended in the specific, airless way of a room full of people watching someone fail a test they had been warned about. He tried twice more to find language that would reframe the situation, and each time Kaelen met it with one precise, flat sentence that removed the reframe at the root. No anger, no performance, just a systematic, unhurried dismantling, delivered in the same tone someone might use to correct a spreadsheet error. By the end of it, Derek Cho had been informed that his placement was concluded, that security would assist him with his desk, and that the revised agenda would proceed with Evans presenting first. Maya presented. The room was extremely attentive. Afterward, when the floor had cleared and she was gathering her documents at the conference table, she heard his footsteps behind her. She had learned to identify them by sound, which was a skill she had not anticipated developing. "You knew," she said. "In the marketing floor. You heard him." Kaelen stopped on the other side of the table. "I heard him. And you waited. I wanted to see if he would reverse course before the meeting." Maya set her documents down and looked at him. "Why did you do that? The way you did it, you could have handled it before the room was full." His gold eyes were steady. The morning light through the conference room windows caught them and held, and she was far enough from that first midnight in the tank that she could look at them without her nervous system treating it as an emergency. "No one takes from what belongs to my floor," he said. She held his gaze. "I don't belong to your floor. I belong to myself." He considered this with the particular attention he gave to information that required recategorization. "You are on my floor," he said finally. "What is on my floor is under my protection. The distinction you're drawing is understood, but it does not change the operational principle." Maya looked at him for a long moment. He meant it entirely. There was no possessiveness in the way she would have understood that word from anyone else. No ego or performance. It was something older than that. Something structural. A principle as instinctive to him as temperature regulation, which she had also seen him struggle with in ways that a normal person would find alarming. He was not treating her like an employee. He was not treating her like a person he was attracted to, or at least not only that. He was treating her like Pac. She was still working out how she felt about that, and whether the warmth it produced in her chest was a reasonable response or a problem she needed to solve. "Next time," she said, "tell me what you heard. We handle it together." He studied her face. 3 seconds. 4. "Agreed," he said. It was the second time he had agreed with her in a week. She did not point this out. She was, however, definitely noting it internally. The Whispering Pines retreat was 3 hours into the mountain range by charter bus, which meant 3 hours of Kaelen sitting in the front row in a window seat, perfectly still, watching the tree line, the way someone watches a horizon they are navigating toward rather than away from. Maya sat 2 rows back with her laptop and a spreadsheet and tried not to notice the way his shoulders had shifted incrementally since they left the city. Something loosening and sharpening at the same time, like a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. The other executives spread across the bus behind them in the normal pattern of corporate travel. Quiet conversations, phones, the occasional laptop. No one sat in the row directly adjacent to Kaelen. This was a pattern she had started to recognize. The radius of empty space around him in any room was not coincidental. People felt something they could not name, a pressure, a directional awareness, like standing near the edge of something with a very long drop. She had, in 3 weeks, become somewhat immune to it. She was still working out whether that was professional acclimatization or something more specific. The resort materialized out of the forest like something designed to convince executives that nature was a controllable variable. Stone and dark timber, high ceilings of glass, fire pits already lit against the cooling mountain air. The rooms were individual cabins distributed along wooded paths, which the retreat coordinator described as immersive, And Maya clocked immediately as complicated from a logistics standpoint, because keeping track of Kaelen's location in a building was already a part-time project, and keeping track of him across a forested mountain property was a categorically different problem. He stood at the edge of the main deck when they arrived and breathed in through his nose with the unhurried, systematic attention of someone reading a document. Then he turned and told her the meeting itinerary for the next morning was fine, and he would not require anything until the bonfire event at 7. "Are you okay?" she asked. He looked at her. "I'm define the parameter." "You're doing the thing where you look like you're about to file a territorial claim on the entire mountain range." Something crossed his face that in another man she would have called wry. "I'm fine," he said. "Go unpack." She went. She did not entirely believe him. The problem with the mountain was that it was working on him. She could see it by late afternoon, the way he moved through the resort property when she passed him on the path between the main lodge and the conference cabin, less contained than in the city, wider in his stride, his attention sweeping the tree line in long, slow arcs, with the focused quality of something tracking coordinates. In Zenith Tower, the ice baths and the climate-controlled floors, and the curated stillness of his routine built a structure around his instincts. Up here, with pine and cold mountain air, and the deep, unmanaged wilderness pressing in on all sides, the structure was thinner. She made a note to herself to keep the evening manageable. She also, completely separately, and for entirely personal reasons having nothing to do with the situation, wore the dark green top to the bonfire. It was casual wear, technically. It fit in the specific way that things fit when you have bought them in a size that fits, rather than a size that apologizes for existing. She had her hair down because the cabin's single hairdryer had a motivation problem. The jeans were the good ones. She told herself she was not making a choice. She was making the only practical selection from a bag she had packed in 20 minutes. The bonfire was in the main clearing. Elevated fire pit, fairy lights strung between the pines, the kind of setup that cost a lot of money to look effortless. About 30 executives and senior staff, drinks in hand, the loosened, slightly human versions of the people she had navigated for 3 weeks in their formal configurations. Someone had found a sound system. The mountain air was cold and clean and smelled like wood smoke and fir. She was 3 minutes into a genuinely useful conversation with 2 senior directors from the acquisitions team when she felt him arrive. She didn't hear him. She never heard him. He simply appeared at a distance, glass of water in hand, because she had never seen him drink anything else, standing at the outer edge of the firelight. He looked at the party the way he looked at most social configurations, as a system he was analyzing rather than participating in. He looked at the acquisitions directors. He looked at Maya. His expression did not change. Her conversation with the acquisitions directors changed, though. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in the specific, incremental way of a room temperature shifting. One of the directors, Holt, who had been leaning slightly toward her in the comfortable way of someone who had decided the evening had potential, straightened almost imperceptibly. The other one found something of great interest in his drink. This happened again 15 minutes later, with a VP from the regional partnerships team, a man named Marcus who was funny and tall and had been making her laugh for 4 minutes running when she became aware of the pressure change behind her left shoulder. Marcus's joke completed itself, and then he remembered something he had to do on the other side of the clearing and went to do it with more urgency than seemed strictly necessary. She turned. Kaelen was 2 feet behind her. He was looking at the space where Marcus had been, with the calm, absolute attention of something that has made a decision and is waiting for the environment to register it. "Are you following me?" she said. "I'm attending the event. You're standing directly behind me. This is where I'm standing." She looked at him. He looked at the middle distance. The fire threw warm light across the planes of his face and turned his eyes. In this light, a deep amber that was not quite human and was not quite not. "You know," she said carefully, Networking is a professional skill I need to develop. It requires other people to remain in the conversation for longer than 90 seconds. Your networking was unproductive. It was productive for 4 minutes before you materialized behind me like a very large weather event. Holt from Acquisitions was not interested in your professional development. I'm aware of that, and I was handling it. It was handled. She stared at him. He held her gaze with the infuriating patience of something that does not experience social discomfort as a concept. Somewhere behind him, she could see Marcus telling someone a story on the far side of the fire, laughing, having apparently recovered from whatever had sent him retreating at speed. The story was probably funnier without the specific addition of Kaelen Vance's territorial radius. I need you to not do this, she said. I'm standing here. You're weaponizing standing here. Go enjoy the event, Maya. She lasted 11 more minutes. In those 11 minutes, she had 2 more abbreviated conversations, both of which concluded ahead of schedule. The second one ended when a perfectly pleasant woman from legal glanced over Maya's shoulder, met Kaelen's gaze, and discovered an urgent reason to refresh her drink. The woman had not been flirting with Maya at all. She had just been standing near her. Kaelen had apparently decided proximity itself was a category requiring management. Maya set her drink down on the nearest flat surface and walked into the trees. Not a dramatic exit. She didn't announce it. She simply crossed the edge of the firelight and kept walking, onto the dark path that wound between the pines and away from the music and the light and the entire event, because the alternative was saying something to him at volume in front of 30 colleagues that she would have to write a very creative HR explanation for afterward. She made it perhaps 150 feet into the trees. Enough that the bonfire was a warm glow between the trunks behind her, and the cold mountain air pressed in from all sides, and the silence was the deep, living kind, full of wind in high branches and the distant sound of something moving in the undergrowth. She was not surprised when she heard no footsteps. She was also not surprised when she became aware, with the particular sense she had developed for this specifically, that he was there. She turned. He was 10 feet behind her, darker than the dark between the trees, his silhouette picking up the faint ambient light in a way that made him look larger than inside, which should not have been geometrically possible. His eyes caught no light that she could identify a source for. They were gold again, steady and luminous, and trained on her with an attention that had no corporate modifier in it. "Explain yourself," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was an achievement. "You walked into unmonitored terrain at night." "I walked 50 meters from a company event." 150. She paused. "You counted." He didn't answer that. "Kaelen." She used his name the way she had started to use it, as a tool, sharp and specific. "This is not executive assistant territory. You hovering behind me for 2 hours and driving away everyone I try to speak to is not schedule management, and it is not pack protection, or whatever framework you're using for it. You need to explain what is actually happening, or I need you to go back to the bonfire and let me stand in the woods alone for 5 minutes, which I am fully entitled to do." He crossed the distance between them in the way he moved when he had decided something, unhurried and entirely inevitable. She held her ground because she had learned by now that stepping back accomplished nothing. He simply adjusted the distance. And also because some part of her had stopped wanting to step back, which was a separate problem she was not solving tonight. He stopped close. The pine tree at her back registered as a solid fact at approximately the same moment his arm came to rest against the bark beside her head. Not trapping, not threatening, just present. Just him, large and warm in the cold mountain air, smelling like wood smoke and something older and cleaner than anything in the city. "It has nothing to do with work," he said. She looked up at him. "Then what?" "I'm an alpha." He said it the way he said most things, as information, as established fact, with none of the self-consciousness a human man might bring to it. The last pureblood. It means the instincts are not managed so much as suppressed, and the suppression requires specific conditions. Cold, controlled environment, distance from stimuli. I know this, she said. I've been scheduling your ice baths. The stimuli includes you. A pause. Something moved across his face, not quite discomfort, more like the expression of a man reading a map that covers terrain he has no language for. Watching other men approach you triggers a territorial response that is not corporate in origin and does not respond to corporate management. The cold air moved between the pines. A branch shifted somewhere above them. Maya kept her eyes on his face. Say what you're saying, she said quietly. You're my mate, Punk. The words were simple and direct, and landed in her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. I understand that this is not a category that exists in your framework. I understand the professional situation. I am telling you because you asked for an explanation, and this is the accurate one. The reason I cannot stand 20 feet away while men I outrank look at you like a resource to acquire is not a management philosophy. It is something I do not fully control, and it is getting worse, and the mountain is not helping. She was quiet for a moment. The firelight was a distant warmth through the trees. His eyes were very close and very gold. That's, she started, stopped, started again. Saya, please. You could have mentioned this before the retreat. I was managing it. You managed it by driving away a woman from legal who was talking to me about contract review processes. She was standing too close. She was cold, Kaelen. She was standing near the fire. He looked, briefly, like he was processing whether to revise that assessment. He did not revise it. She didn't actually expect him to. She was aware of how close they were. She was aware of his hand against the pine bark 6 inches from her face. She was aware of the specific quality of the silence between them, weighted and very still, the kind of silence that exists in the second before something changes. She tilted her face up. He lowered his. 3 inches. 2. The howl came from deep in the forest to the north, long and resonant and absolutely, unmistakably real, rolling through the trees and into the mountain, dark like a question. Kaelen went rigid. His head snapped toward the sound, all of him reorienting in a fraction of a second from whatever that moment had been to something entirely different. His eyes blazed bright gold. Maya's heart was doing several things at once. What was that? Old territory, he said. His voice had dropped an octave into something she felt in her sternum. Not a wolf from the retreat fauna. So there's another one. He looked back at her. The gold in his eyes was not settling. We need to go back. We, she said, are absolutely having a continuation of this conversation. Werewolf. Yes, he said. He straightened. The moment folded away into something he was carrying now, present and unresolved. We are. He walked back toward the firelight. She followed, one breath at a time, aware of the howl still echoing somewhere in the trees, aware of his shoulder a foot from hers, aware that the word mate was sitting in her chest and had no intention of leaving quietly. The howl in the mountains had been a warning. Maya understood that in retrospect, the way you understand the first crack of ice under your feet, only after you have already committed your weight. They returned from Whispering Pines on a Sunday. By Monday morning, the 43rd floor conference suite was occupied by a legal team that had not been there Friday. And by 9:15, Maya's inbox contained a calendar hold for an emergency negotiation that Kaelen had accepted without telling her, which meant she found out about it from the building's visitor log rather than from him, which was a communication failure she put directly in her mental file of things they were going to discuss. The rival conglomerate was called Greyvale Capital. Its CEO was a man named Soren Ashvale, and everything she could find about him in the 40 minutes before the meeting read as impeccably normal. Mid-40s. East Coast, educated. 3 successful hostile acquisitions in 6 years. Photographs showed someone lean and composed, silver at the temples, with the particular smile of a man who had learned early that charm was a tool and had sharpened it accordingly. She sat to Kaelen's right in the main boardroom. Grayvale's team occupied the other side of the table, 8 lawyers and 1 man at the center who was not, she registered the moment he walked in, normal. She could not have explained how she knew. It was not visual. Soren Ashvale looked precisely as his photographs suggested, composed and faintly amused, moving through the room with the ease of someone accustomed to owning the temperature of every space he entered. But there was something underneath the surface, a pressure, a frequency, the same way she had learned to feel Kaelen's presence before she could see him, except different in quality. Where Kaelen's was heat and gravity, this was something cooler, smoother, deliberate in a way that felt like a blade kept flat to avoid catching light. Kaelen had gone very still beside her. Not his working still. The other kind. The meeting opened with the standard language of corporate negotiation, the polite fiction of mutual benefit, terms and frameworks, and the choreography of 2 entities establishing who would flinch first. Maya managed the documents. She passed materials across the table, tracked the timeline on her tablet, did the 20 things that no one in the room credited her for doing. Soren Ashvale had been watching her since he sat down. Not obviously. He was too controlled, for obvious. But she caught it twice, a glance that lingered a half-second past professional, that took in not her face but her hands, the tablet, the master drive she had brought as a reference for the IP assets documentation. She told herself it was nothing. Then he smiled at her, directly, across the table, during a pause in the proceedings, and something happened behind his eyes that did not match the smile, and the back of her skull went cold. "Miss Evans?" His voice was pleasant, exactly the right temperature. "Perhaps you could bring the master drive documentation to this side of the table. It would help our team review the relevant assets more efficiently." She had already moved before she understood she was moving, which was the part that frightened her. Her hand closed around the drive and she was halfway out of her chair, and there was a high, thin pressure at the base of her skull, like a finger pressing directly on a nerve, and she thought, in the small, clear part of her mind that was still fully hers, that is not a request. It was not pain exactly. It was the sensation of her own volition becoming a room with a locked door. She heard the sound before she registered what caused it. The marble table split down the center. Not cracked. Not broke. Split, with a sound like a mountain deciding to revise its geology, a deep concussive crack that shook the walls and sent 8 lawyers out of their chairs simultaneously, and the 2 halves of a table that had been in the Apex Vanguard boardroom for 22 years, shifted apart and revealed Kaelen Vance standing between them. The pressure in Maya's skull vanished. She sat back down hard. Kaelen was not fully himself. That was the only way she had to frame it. He was still wearing the dark suit, still recognizably the man who had rewritten emails with her and agreed with her twice and pressed his hand against a pine tree beside her face in the dark. But his eyes were not amber gold. They were incandescent, blazing, filling the iris completely. And the air around him was doing something that had no meteorological explanation. A pressure wave, a weight, like the moment before a lightning strike when the atmosphere itself is paying attention. His hands, where they had come down on the table, showed the edge of something at the fingertips. Not claws, not fully, but the suggestion of them, the direction of something suppressed with effort. "You used compulsion on her," Kaelen said. His voice had dropped below its normal register into something that was not quite a human vocal frequency, something that resonated in the sternum and the base of the spine. "In my building, in my boardroom, on my mate." Soren Ashvale had risen from his chair. The composed amusement was gone. Underneath it was something older and sharper, and Maya had approximately 1 second to register that she was in a room with 2 things that were genuinely, categorically, not human, before Kaelen crossed the table. He did not walk around it. He moved across the fractured marble and covered the distance in 3 strides, and had Soren Ashvale by the collar before the man's lawyers had finished processing the table. He walked him backward through the open boardroom doors and into the corridor with the specific, unhurried momentum of something that has stopped performing restraint. She heard, from the corridor, Kaelen's voice. She could not make out the words. She did not need to. The message was structural. When he came back, the boardroom contained 8 lawyers who had aged several years in the last 45 seconds. They gathered their materials with the coordinated efficiency of people who have collectively decided that billionaire instability is someone else's problem. They were gone in under 3 minutes. Kaelen stood in the ruined boardroom. The 2 halves of the marble table sat apart like a geological feature. His eyes were returning to their baseline gold, slowly, the incandescence dimming but not gone. The claws were gone. The suit was, implausibly, still mostly intact. He looked at his hands, then at the table. Something crossed his face that she recognized from the pine trees, the particular expression of a man who has operated without a map and is now reading the terrain. "Maya," his voice was careful. "You should—" She crossed the room and took his tie in both hands and kissed him. Not tentatively. Not as a question. She had been building toward this since a midnight printer and a tank of ice water and 3 weeks of translating a warlord into email format, and she was done waiting for a less dramatic moment, because she was fairly certain this was simply the kind of life she had now. He went completely still for exactly 1 second. Then his arms came around her, and he was warm and solid and present in the specific way that large, ancient things are present. And the kiss was not gentle, but it was careful with her, which was the distinction that mattered. When she stepped back, his eyes were gold and steady and all the way his. "You didn't run," he said. "You shattered a marble table protecting me," she said. "I'm choosing to find that romantic rather than alarming." "It was both," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "That's basically the whole situation." He looked at the table again. Something that was not quite a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "I'll have it replaced. Get the same marble. I want continuity in this story." The months that followed were not simple. Simple was not a category that applied to the intersection of a pureblood alpha and a former intern turned executive in a building of 4,000 employees with opinions and HR policies and a fraternization clause on page 47 of the employee handbook. But they were good, in the specific, substantial way of things built on honest foundations, on the understanding that one of you is navigating a world not built to your scale, and the other is very good at translation. Maya's title was Senior Strategy Director, which she had earned without any assistance from him, which she had made him understand was a non-negotiable condition of the whole arrangement. She had told him this in the direct, clear language she used when the matter was serious, and he had looked at her with the particular focused attention he reserved for information that reorganized his understanding of something, and agreed. Her office had a window that faced east. She had kept it. She found the handbook on a Tuesday, deep in the filing drawer she had been reorganizing, the original orientation document from her intern onboarding, slightly bent at the corner from having been pressed under 7 months of other documents. She flipped to page 47. She was smiling when she walked into his office. He was at his desk, which meant he was a wall of dark, tailored suit and focused attention, but he looked up immediately, which he always did when she came in, which she had stopped pretending she didn't notice. She held up the handbook, page 47 face out, pointed to the relevant clause. He looked at the page. He looked at her. He looked at the page again, with the expression of a man performing a brief cost-benefit analysis. Then he took the handbook, dropped it in the trash beside his desk, and pulled her onto his lap in one unhurried motion, and she laughed, which was not a sound she had produced very often in this office in the early days, and was now one of its regular features. "The policy," she said, "is a guideline," he said, against her hair. "That's not what page 47 says. Page 47 was written by someone who did not account for all possible variables." She settled against his chest, which was the most structurally reliable surface she had encountered in her life. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched in every direction. Glass and steel and the ordinary, impossible noise of a world moving through its day. Unaware that on the 50th floor of Zenith Tower, the most feared executive in the conglomerate sector was sitting quietly with his arms around the woman who had walked into his ice room at midnight with a USB drive and changed the terms of everything. Some people spend a lifetime looking for the person who makes the world make sense. Some people find them on a restricted floor at 4 minutes past midnight, next to a high-speed printer that actually worked. The heart, like the best corporate strategies, does not always follow the approved channels. Sometimes the most important meeting on your calendar is the one that was never scheduled. And sometimes the promotion you never asked for turns out to be exactly the role you were built for. If this story made you feel something, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below and tell us what you thought of Maya and Kaelen. Your support means everything, and the next story is already waiting for you.